We see you as you sit behind the wheel of your truck. We see you shake out the nerves before you pick up your hammer, your scissors, your pots and pans. As you find new ways to keep the lights on and put the pieces back together, we see you. As you straighten the rows, keep your customers safe, and crunch the numbers, we see you. As you head back to work, we see you. You've got this. We're open to help you reopen. Visit bbb.org.
Hello and welcome to this Building Trust in Trying Times webinar. I'm your host, Dale Dixon. So good to have you with us. If you have not been to one of these Better Business Bureau webinars, just a quick background. These webinars are live for BBB accredited businesses. Those are businesses that have taken a pledge to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do and follow a set of standards, be held accountable to those set of standards. So when you see BBB accredited business, that's the business that has taken the pledge to live by the standards for trust, honesty, and ethics in the marketplace, making us all better. So thank you if you're one of those businesses. We have a terrific topic today in creating and retaining a diverse workforce. And this webinar is being recorded. You could come back and watch it, share it with others, send it to colleagues. We definitely recommend that. It'll be posted on our Facebook page along with our YouTube video channel as well. And we have some terrific people working behind the scenes in Jamie Dillon, and she's going to be working to put those links up in the show notes in the chat bar as well. Jason Kama is also with us working behind the scenes watching all of this. So we do have an opportunity for you to ask questions as well as we go through this process. To do that, super simple. We ask that you use the question and answer feature in the Zoom window. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see Q&A. Click that and you can type in your question. While you're there, you can read other questions and we have an upvote opportunity. So if you see a question that you say, oh, that resonates, I would love to have an answer to that question as well, click the thumbs up and upvote that, and that will lift that question to the top of the order for our panelists today. So we encourage you to do that. With that, our topic today, as I said, creating and retaining a diverse workforce. We're so fortunate to have with us today Andrea Harden. And Andrea is the Trainer and Targeted Equitable Relief Coordinator for the Montana Human Rights Bureau. Prior to taking on that role, she investigated and mediated cases of discrimination and retaliation at the Bureau. Before joining the Bureau, Andrea worked as a staff attorney for the Georgia Legal Services Program, practicing law primarily in the areas of family and housing law. Andrea received her Juris Doctor from University of Denver and her undergrad degree at the International Business from San Diego State University. Andrea, so good to have you with us today. Thank you for making time to share some really valuable information with our participants on the webinar.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I really look forward to speaking with everyone today regarding creating and retaining a diverse workforce. And I'm going to go ahead and open up here so that you can follow along in a PowerPoint presentation that I've put together here. And so once again, just to introduce myself, I'm Andrea Harden. I am the Trainer Coordinator for the Montana Human Rights Bureau. I'm very pleased to be with you here today to speak on this important topic. Just going to give a little bit of a brief overview of what it is that we do here at the Montana Human Rights Bureau, just so that you understand some of the information that I'm coming with today. I realize that those of you listening may be working outside of Montana, and I understand that this is a regional audience, so I think it would be helpful to first go over very briefly what the Montana Human Rights Bureau is, what we do here, so that you understand where I am coming from. First of all, the Human Rights Bureau is a state agency within the Montana Department of Labor and Industry. We are charged with enforcing certain state and federal laws that prohibit unlawful discrimination. When a person files a complaint with the Montana Human Rights Bureau, our investigators conduct an informal investigation into the allegations of discrimination and retaliation. And so the Human Rights Bureau only has jurisdiction to investigate complaints of discrimination and retaliation if those complaints fall within certain protected areas and protected classes. The protected areas I'm referring to include employment, housing, education, public accommodations, some credit and finance areas, and also the state and local governmental agencies here within Montana. And I think it's good to recognize the different protected areas of discrimination law, but for the purposes of this presentation, of course, we're focusing specifically in on the area of employment. And it's interesting to note that 85% of the cases filed in fiscal year 2020 here in Montana were in the area of employment. So it is one of our greatest areas of investigation. Referring back to the protected classes, when we're looking at discrimination complaints, specifically in employment law, we're looking at protected classes that include age, disability, race, national origin, color, religion or creed, and sex. And of course, sex is a very all-encompassing area of a protected class. It can include things such as pregnancy, maternity, sexual harassment, and sexual orientation. And there are a couple other protected classes that are unique to Montana law or that don't apply to private employers. So I won't go over those, but if you're interested in learning about any of those, you can go to montanadiscrimination.com if you are within the state of Montana or want to learn a little bit more about other types of protected classes. It's also kind of important to note, touching back on the way in which the Bureau enforces or investigates certain federal laws, we have a contract with the EEOC to investigate complaints of discrimination in the area of employment where the employer has at least 15 employees or 20 employees in the case of age discrimination specifically. And those are the requirements set out in those federal laws. So this contract that we have with EEOC, it requires the Bureau to apply not only Montana Human Rights Act law when we analyze these cases, but it also requires the application of federal anti-discrimination laws for employment cases that the Montana Human Rights Bureau investigates. For the most part, especially in employment discrimination, Montana law parallels federal law. So this information, particularly when speaking about discrimination laws, should still be applicable, to those of you that are listening outside of the state of Montana. And so in addressing the creation and retention of a diverse workforce, the first thing to address, of course, is what is diversity? So we look at the Merriam-Webster definition, and it says that diversity is the condition of having or being composed of different elements. In my research of this topic, I came across an interesting benchmark study entitled Best Practices in Achieving Workforce Diversity that was conducted by the U.S. Department of Commerce and the former Vice President Al Gore's National Partnership for Reinventing Government. That's quite a mouthful, so it looks like they refer to that study as the NPR study, of course, National Partnership for Reinventing, I think is where they drew that NPR from. But this report acknowledges that, quote, one of the major stumbling blocks in discussions surrounding diversity is its very definition. The study also acknowledged that diversity is often viewed as applying to race, ethnicity, or gender differences, and it's linked to laws providing protected status to certain groups, which are those protected classes that I mentioned earlier. However, this study took a decidedly different approach to defining diversity, which is all characteristics and experiences that define each of us as individuals. So like the NPR definition, I think a broad approach to defining diversity is best and includes accepting and respecting differences. Diversity in the workplace means an employer employs people from a range of different protected classes, experiences, and backgrounds. This diversity should also be represented throughout the hierarchy of the company or the agency. And so the next point to understanding when considering a diverse workforce is, why is diversity important? So, well, first off, we want to look at the fact that a lack of diversity stymies innovation. People from various social and cultural backgrounds bring with them a variety of new ideas, knowledge, and approaches. This fosters more creativity and innovation as individuals are challenged to question their own perspectives and step outside their respective comfort zones. Also, there is the consideration of the work climate or the productivity within your workforce. An inclusive workforce And that environment makes for a more comfortable and welcoming workplace for a broader spectrum of employees. And this naturally increases team morale. And of course, everybody knows that happier employees makes for more productive employees. And also customer service. This is usually of utmost importance to most businesses. When you're considering customer service, having a diverse business, it gives you better insight into the customers that you serve. If you only employ people from a certain demographic, you could be inadvertently alienating an entire customer base. Also considering the ability to relate to your customer base in employing a diverse workforce will also allow you to offer better customer service to a broader range of your customers. And ultimately, it's important to remember that as an employer, you want to be hiring qualified, competent, and productive employees. If you limit your selection of employees based on assumptions about an applicant's protected class, you're missing out on a sea of qualified, competent, and productive applicants. And so next we're going to go over 3 steps specifically that you can implement to diversifying your workforce. And of course, those 3 steps that we're going to go over in the following slides are first educating yourself. Second is looking at your hiring practices, and then next focusing on retention of your workforce. So the first step in diversifying your workforce as an employer is education. While it might be beneficial to assess your organization's current diversity by looking around you and taking stock, be mindful that, as mentioned previously, not all diversity is visible. For example, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, mental health issues. There are a multitude of diverse attributes an applicant may have that is not seen with the naked eye. Also be careful about asking current employees to disclose their protected classes to you. What is suggested is that you get to know the community around you and identify candidate pools that you can pull from. A lot of the information about your community you can access on the Census Bureau's website. Also, knowing your community will come in handy when you start assessing your hiring practices, which we'll discuss in just a moment. This is so that you can ensure you're tapping into maybe previously unrecognized applicant pools. You want to know, what is the makeup of your community? Are there charitable organizations or advocacy groups associated with certain groups within your community that can be an asset to you? For instance, here in Montana, you may want to tap into a group that we have that's Disability Rights Montana. So that's just an example of a type of advocacy group that you can look into that specifically deals with people of a certain protected class. Since diversity considerations in hiring may include characteristics, like I just mentioned, that fall under a protected class, make sure you understand the state and federal laws that govern anti-discriminatory hiring practices. A failure to hire based on a protected class can be a valid complaint of discrimination. So you'll want to make sure that you're not excluding someone because of their protected class or because they do not fall into a certain category within a protected class that you're seeking to hire for the sake of diversity. So I want to stress again that hiring a diverse workforce should not be a concerted effort to target certain characteristics. Rather, it should happen naturally when you widen the breadth of your search for qualified candidates to previously untapped resources. So after you've educated yourself on the law and the makeup of your community, the next step is to focus on your hiring practices. You'll want to reassess the content of your job postings first and foremost. So look at how you're advertising your vacancies. Consider putting in language that sincerely expresses a desire for diversity in the workplace. I would not suggest using just the simple line that we'll so often see is, we're an EEO employer. No one really knows what that means under most circumstances. So my bureau chief recently mentioned that she saw a posting the other day that said, our employees are like our toppings. They're all different, but come together to make the ultimate pizza. So this is a kind of catchy way of you know, trying to put out there that diversity is important to this organization. It could be worded even stronger, but it puts the idea of diversity out there. Also, when you put together an advertisement, don't assume that the language will be understood by everybody. I think it's really important to have someone objectively review your posting to make sure it's both accessible and interesting. Another example I recently saw is from a company called Slack. They have an online job posting that at the bottom of the description, it says, Slack is an equal employment opportunity employer and participant in the US federally verified program. Women, minorities, individuals with disabilities, and protected veterans are encouraged to apply. Ensuring a diverse and inclusive workplace where we can learn from each other is core to Slack's values. We welcome people of different backgrounds, experiences, abilities, and perspective, and we're a pleasant and supportive place to work. So you can see how that really puts forth the idea of this welcomeness and is very specific, more so than just saying we're an EEO employer. To the point of assessing the content of your job posting, you may also want to review the qualifications for the job vacancy and reconsider if each qualification you list in your job posting is really essential. Studies show that unlike men, women are less likely to apply for a job unless they 100% meet the qualifications listed in a job posting. So remember, when you're reassessing the qualifications you list, lowering the barriers does not necessarily mean you have to hire someone with less qualifications than you are seeking. It just means that you're likely to get a larger pool of diverse applicants to pull from. Also, when looking at your hiring practices, it's also valuable to review how you are advertising your vacant positions. In seeking diversity, your goal should be to cast a wider net where you advertise the vacancy. To fill your recruitment pipeline with more diverse candidates, you really need to cast a wider net. Rather than just sticking to your traditional channels, consider advertising your posting in places that you have not posted in before. Remember, pointing back again to what we had talked about before, knowing your community and its makeup in this aspect will really be helpful. For instance, are there charities or advocacy groups with job boards in your area that you can help to get your posting out to more people? Also consider conducting a review of applications blindly. This can be having someone outside the hiring committee remove personal information that can lead to unconscious bias or telltale signs of an applicant's diversity, or maybe membership in a protected class even. Such information that can give you these indications are things such as names that imply a gender, dates of birth, or even years of experience that indicate an applicant's age. And that goes both ways. You know, a dearth of experience, you may have an unconscious bias to say that this person might be older, and a less, you know, years of experience, you may be likely to say that this person is younger. So all these types of information that people put in their applications or their resumes can often lead us to these unconscious biases. So it's good to try and be aware of those. And also there are software programs available that will anonymize, I always have difficulty with that word, make anonymous resumes for review. So as much as an employer can make the application process anonymous and simply focus on merit and qualification, the better in this regard. And also making sure that your hiring committee has a broad and diverse background. That'll help bring varied opinions about applicants to the table. I think when we're interviewing, we have to be aware, we have to acknowledge that we have an inherent bias towards people that are like us. To this point, having interviewers stick to a script that will help remove unfair biases, and that's because you will only be asking questions that are relevant and appropriate. Asking the same questions for every candidate also ensures that the candidates are being evaluated by the same objectives. Also consider asking questions of applicants to gauge their value of diversity and acceptance of others' differences in the workplace. When you're conducting references, consider asking the references whether he or she is aware of any act or omission by the applicant that indicates that the applicant would not be able to uphold your company's strict policies on discrimination. And lastly, when you are reviewing your hiring practices, look for ways to solicit feedback from the applicants. Consider sending your applicants online surveys. And also, you can reach out to the applicants and provide your name and number to solicit any type of feedback or questions. And that's a way also to just consider really a way to assess your hiring practices and what it was like somebody from the outside to go through that process with your organization. In looking at retention, or our last step here, it's important after you've educated yourself on the law and the makeup of your community, you then need to focus on your retention, reassess the content of your job postings. I do apologize, I'm having a little bit of a hiccup here. Looks like my slides are not going with me. You can bear with me for one moment. Okay.
Just so you know, Andre, what we see on our screen is retention and messaging your organization's values.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I do apologize for that. Okay, I think I've got the same thing up here now. So yes, focusing on your company's messaging as far as retention, you'll want to begin to permeate your workplace with the message that you value diversity. For example, you're saying this in staff meetings, you're training on this topic. It's in sporadic email messages perhaps, and of course, like we just talked about, it's in your job postings. The trick to this is figuring out how to do this in a sincere manner that resonates with your employees. Next, and very importantly, is being proactive about your policies. You'll want to pull your discrimination policies out and dust them off, make sure they say and convey what you feel is important and not just some stock language that you found on the internet. When it comes to policy, I cannot say this loud enough, messaging on the importance of anti-discrimination has to be top down. More specifically, make sure that you have a process and ideally in writing in your policies for both reasonable accommodations and maternity leave as well. And if we have enough time, I know we're getting close here, but I'll try and hit a little bit more on the importance of policies if we have time with that. So continuing on with the idea of retention, you'll also want to make sure that your employees are educated on your policies. You'll want to foster the reporting of discrimination within your organization, any type of discriminatory actions. Consider the reporting process and whether you want it to be anonymous, if you want to have an open door type policy, or whether maybe you have a hotline complaint procedure in place. But make sure that you have a prompt and effective investigation process for complaints of discrimination. Make enforcing anti-discrimination policies a priority by putting it in your employees' performance evaluations perhaps, or have it be a component of a job description. Also consider conducting exit interviews for employees that are leaving the company in order to garner that valuable feedback once again to adequately assess your practices. And so everybody wants things to change, but nobody wants to change anything a lot of the time. So I think questions around diversity get put on the back burner by employers, especially right now because employers a lot of times are just trying to figure out how to make their businesses work. So my goal for employers would be to have you carve out some time, just like this meeting today, to take a look at how you could do things better. Take a few small, sincere, and thoughtful steps towards a more diverse workforce. Then maybe in a few weeks, take a few more steps. I don't think that you would regret this use of your time. Okay. And so we're going to focus for the little bit of remaining time that we can specifically on the topic of workplace harassment. Retaining a diverse workforce hinges on an employer's ability to confront and adequately address workplace harassment, or what is also known as a hostile work environment. Because harassment is underreported and detrimentally impacts the work environment, including an employer's ability to retain a diverse workforce, we're going to focus a little bit more on better understanding what is harassment or a hostile work environment. And so according to the EEOC, harassment is hugely underreported. The reasons vary from humiliation to fear of reprisal. I think most of us can identify with not wanting to rock the boat on this issue. And if you're like most employers, you don't think harassment is a problem, which may be understandable because, as it turns out, most employees don't report harassment. The EOC found that 70% of employees never even complain internally, and upwards of 85% never file a form or formal legal charges even. And so when the Bureau specifically gets a complaint of harassment or a hostile work environment, this slide shows you the elements that we consider. These are legal elements. We have to look at the conduct being based on a protected class, whether the conduct was unwelcome, and the most difficult, at least for me a lot of the times, is whether the conduct is severe or pervasive. And only if and when someone is able to satisfy all these elements do we actually find that there was harassment. But even then, our work is not over because there may be a viable defense to the harassment claim. And analyzing harassment cases are terrifically difficult to do. Typically, a complaint of harassment is between an employee and either a coworker or a supervisor. But this can be males harassing females or females harassing males. It can be same sex, same gender harassment. There's really no bounds to this anymore. And so I just want to talk a moment about, that this is a hard conversation to have when you maybe overhear or witness somebody being harassed or bullied. A lot of people will use the term bullying as well. It's hard to stand up and say, whoa, that's offensive, but I know it can be done, and I know it can be done thoughtfully. And so I want to talk a little bit about some practical tips that can help you as an employer maybe deter harassment at your organization and effectively deal with it when it does happen. And so spending some time going through these tips, and I'll try to be brief to leave time for questions. But dealing with potential harassment or hostile work environment complaints can be a very difficult subject. A lot of these tips actually kind of overlap with the suggestions regarding diversity that we've already gone over. But as you have learned what harassment is in a very abbreviated form, I think you will understand why these issues can overlap and why it's important maybe to focus on harassment when you're thinking about trying to retain a diverse workforce. And plus, of course, we know repetition aids in learning. And so the first tip is dedicate resources to this topic. Resources can be money, time, staff. It's important to set aside resources tasked with addressing this issue. Two is, if you have a discrimination harassment policy in place today or tomorrow, take time to review it, consider the language. Do you understand it? Will your staff understand it? Does it convey your values as a company? If you don't have a policy, now is the time to put one together. Make sure that it sets the tone. Make sure it conveys the gravity of a violation reflecting your values and sensibilities. If you make changes or make a new policy, make sure you disseminate this new policy to all your employees and direct them to review and encourage them to ask questions. One thing to consider also as an employer is a separate signature or acknowledgement form specifically for your discrimination policy. The third point or a practical tip is to make sure that you have a procedure for staff to complain about discrimination and harassment. I know that some employers make this very formal, and there are great reasons to do so, but more than anything, you want to make it as easy as possible for your employees to bring forward their concerns. You need a procedure that allows you to address concerns promptly and effectively. So the sooner you know if there's a problem, the sooner you can fix it and move forward. And since it's applicable to the last couple of tips we just went over, we're going to take a short detour here for a second. As I said, we'd hopefully would, if we had enough time, to just focus in a little bit more, provide you a little bit more information about policies and procedures. First and foremost, your policies and procedures allow you, once again, to set the tone for your company, and they tell your employees what to expect. Next, they'll hopefully provide you with guidance and a roadmap if there is an issue. If you have a plan to address a harassment complaint, you're simply going to know what to do if you get hit with a harassment complaint by an employee. Finally, if you do get hit with a harassment complaint, I can tell you that our Bureau will ask you for your policies and procedures. Previously, I talked about the elements of a charge of harassment. Assuming the charging party establishes all of those elements, we then turn to the respondent to see if there's a viable defense. A component of viable defense includes having quality policies and procedures in place to address that harassment. So I'll say that again, employers that have high quality policies and procedures in place to address harassment are better off when it comes to defending against complaints of harassment as well. Okay. All right, so heading back into our policies, our little detour from our policies and procedures, we're going to consider the next two practical tips real quick. Consider asking applicants if they would be able to commit to maintaining a harassment-free environment. I'd like to think everyone answering that question would of course say yes. So really the only purpose to that question is to set that out there as a priority for your business. Similarly, when you do reference checks, again, ask the reference if they're aware of any acts or omissions by the applicant that would conflict with your company's strict non-discrimination policy. As an example of that, our bureau chief asks the question in this way: the Montana Human Rights Bureau is charged with protecting Montanans' civil rights. Is there anything you're aware of that would suggest that the applicant is not 100% on board with the mission of the Bureau? And real quick, continuing with these tips, when you bring employees in addition to giving them the basics on where to park and their workspace, make sure that you're telling them about your agency's non-discrimination policies. Walk through it with your new employees, encourage them to ask questions. You want to make sure that they understand it. And lucky number 7, do dedicated staff trainings. This is something that the Bureau here in Montana or an equivalent agency in your state may be able to help you out with if you need ideas for staff trainings and ideas, Q&As, that type of thing. Let's see here. I know we're running a little bit short on time, and so I'm trying to do a little bit of a compressed version here, moving through these points so that we can wrap it up and open up for some questions. Okay, and so tip number 9 is to teach your employees to stand up for each other, encourage them to get involved. So after you trained your employees about unacceptable behavior, train them on speaking up for each other. Consider an entire training on something to the effect of bystander training. Think about it this way: if you have an employee at ground zero telling another employee, hey, we don't use that language here, that really is in your best interest. We want employees to buy into this respectful and inclusive environment. They have to want to do it. If they're not comfortable addressing it in the moment, make sure that they know they can talk to the employee that was harassed about reporting the behavior. So again, encourage your employees to stand up for one another and be involved. They need to know how to do this, and most importantly, they have to know that they won't be retaliated against for reporting. In order to continue to set the tone regarding your company's stance on harassment, consider implementing an agenda item on these topics as part of your staff meetings in order to keep the issue top of mind. Also, having compliance with discrimination policies as part of your annual review of employee performance, that may be a way to enforce and encourage compliance as well. And number 12, let's see here. Having a dedicated go-to person to deal with complaints of discrimination and who is trained to conduct investigation into those complaints, that not only reinforces your company's policies, but it also can mean the difference between being found liable for harassment or not in an administrative hearing or court. If you're a smaller employer without the ability to have a dedicated staff member to do these tasks, it's important to maybe consider an outside resource specifically for this purpose. And wrapping up our last couple of 15 practical tips here, these last 3 tips really all deal with management. And so, again, it's a top-down approach. Modeling the appropriate behavior in the workplace is imperative, and also having alert and informed management can also be the difference between avoiding liability for a hostile work environment or harassment complaint or not. And let's see here. Just trying to wrap it up here. I'm going to cut it short so that I can have a chance to talk to you guys a little bit if there's any questions. So just kind of to bring it back to center and front, remember, a qualified, diverse workforce unencumbered by harassment is good for business and good for your bottom line. This type of workforce encourages innovation, a positive attitude, productivity, retention, and a great customer service base for you. And so thank you so much.
Andrea Harden, thank you. And we do have a few questions. So if we can just hold the line for a few minutes, we'll work through these. Do you have to be the subject of the discrimination to be able to report it? If you witness it happening against someone else, can you report it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that points back to the idea of making sure that your employees know the process for making that report, doing maybe that bystander type training. So no, absolutely. If you see somebody engaging in behavior that you think may be harassing or bullying, definitely that's a reporting that you're going to want to encourage, because as an employer, you'll want to know if those kinds of things are going on so that you can address them and try and really add to that retention of your diverse workforce. If people feel alienated or bullied, they may be less likely to stick around. So no, having that open environment where people feel free to make that report, definitely do that on behalf of your coworkers, stand up for your coworkers.
You made a strong case for diversity in the workplace, talking about innovation, happier workplace, happier customers. We have a question that came in. What are the consequences to businesses that don't hire and have diverse employees?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think, consequences to not hiring diverse workforce are kind of just the opposite of what you'd experience if you did. And so I think not having a diverse workforce, you could possibly lose out on customers. Customers will see that reflection in your employees. They'll see maybe that your company is not open to diversity, and so that may impact their opinion of your company. If you don't hire a diverse workforce, you may have an impact as far as the different types of views that come in through your employees, and so you may not have as much innovation. So I think really just failing to have that diversity is going to possibly negatively impact your business just for some of those reasons of maybe not reflecting your community and not showing that openness and willingness within your business, possibly.
Luana writes, what factors in an employer help to attract diverse candidates?
Oh, factors in an employer that will help to attract. Well, I think kind of leading off of what I was just explaining with the impact, I think having that workforce, having that as something that you kind of put out there to the community. I know that I've seen a lot of companies that really use social media to put out there and show who their workforce is as a way of promotion, actually. And they use that to really put across their ideas of their importance in hiring diverse workforces, and also use it as kind of like a marketing tool. So see, we've got this diverse workforce working for us. This diverse workforce helps us in XYZ ways, kind of things that we went over before. We have great innovation because we have all of this wonderful information coming in through our diverse workforce, and therefore, we're open to this diversity within our customer base as well.
How does my business get started penning policies on maternity leave, reasonable accommodation, etc.? And where else can I post my jobs to entice diverse candidates?
Okay, so working on developing your policies and then where to advertise. So policies, I think, I know that in my experience of working with employers that come through the Bureau here, a lot of them will work with private attorneys to try and draft up their policies. I know also that I believe our Bureau, and I know I've seen it in other equivalent agencies throughout the country, they post standard boilerplate type policies just to kind of start as like a rough draft for somebody to work off of. And so if you're looking for, a starting base, I think that the agency within your state that deals with civil rights and employment issues is a good starting point for you. And then if you're really looking to try and hone in to how to craft those policies specifically to your organization, once again, I think bringing in, hopefully you have several people within your organization that you can bounce these ideas off, once again, for a diverse input to that. And then if you need specifics, if maybe consulting an attorney is kind of outside of your bounds, outside of your realm, once again, reach out to your state agency to discuss that with them. I know that our bureau chief takes questions like that to discuss policy issues, to get feedback of what our bureau would do if we saw certain types of policies come through our door. So use those resources that you have in your state government as well. As far as trying to locate where to advertise your positions, I think once again, this is where your education component of diversifying your workforce is going to come into play. You'll really want to educate yourself on what type of agencies are out there. You will want to see what kind of maybe nonprofit organizations are within your community. A lot of times nonprofit organizations will focus on specific groups within communities. And so they would be a great resource. Not only do they maybe have their own job boards or their own internet postings where you may be able to tap into advertising. If they don't particularly have that, they might have the knowledge of where their particular community goes to look for jobs. And so really rely on your organizations within your community and reach out to those resources. And once again, I know that we, at the Bureau here, we try and catalog those resources also. So once again, I would encourage you to reach out to your state agencies, your equivalent agencies, possibly, your Chamber of Commerce, different places that you'd really just come into being aware of the different aspects of your community through that education.
Next question. How do you hire someone for diversity when you aren't supposed to ask about race?
And that's an excellent point. And that was something that I really tried to focus on since, as I kind of pointed out and alluded to during one of my slides, you really have to be careful with those kinds of things. And I think, I'd mentioned it being a natural kind of progression. And so really, I think what it comes down to is not necessarily hiring somebody based on their race, not hiring somebody based on a protected class. It's really about implementing your own tools and tapping into resources so that you are casting the wide net to really try and attract these types of candidates, and then having the tools in place to get out of the way of yourself and your own biases so that you are open to considering these types of candidates. And so I think really the idea is, no, you don't want to hire somebody based on their race, because that could end up with a complaint of discrimination. But once you step back from actually just making sure that you're not considering those things, if you step back and out of your own biases and unconscious biases, that really you will open yourself up to having the candidates to even consider, and that should kind of be a natural occurrence that you attract those kind of candidates so you have your diverse workforce.
One last question. Do you get a lot of complaints about microaggressions when dealing with hostile workplace issues?
I don't know if necessarily a lot. Of course, it's a term that I've heard, and I am familiar with that. But it really, as far as complaints that we investigate, I don't think that we really concern ourselves with the labels. We really delve beyond the label of microaggressions to really analyze what is actually occurring, what the adverse act is. That's another kind of legal term that we look at. What is the situation that's going on, and what's being done to this individual that would either be severe or pervasive to qualify as harassment, and of course that it's based on a protected class. So we really just rely on the law is what it comes down to. We don't rely on the labels. We go back to what is actually happening and try and investigate why it's happening that way. So no, microaggressions in and of themselves, I don't think is something that really comes up a lot for us. It's more about delving beyond the labels to the actual conduct.
Fantastic. Andrea Harden with the Montana Human Rights Bureau, thank you so much for being with us today. You've given us a lot of information we can put into practice in our business. We really appreciate that. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on our social media channels soon. You'll see, if you look at the chat box, that there is a link to our YouTube page. You can grab that right now, copy and paste it before the webinar concludes, and you can watch for that to be posted at a later time. Should have that up by early next week at the very latest. And with that, this has been a webinar from Better Business Bureau, Building Trust in Trying Times. Andrea, thank you again. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, you too.